Chapter 7. How the Adventure Ended. "Look at what?" said Edmund. "Look at the device on the gold," said Caspian. "A little hammer with a diamond above it like a star," said Drinian. "Why, I've seen that before." "Seen it?" said Caspian. "Why, of course you have. It is the sign of the great Narnian house. This is the Lord Octessia's arm ring." "Villain!" said Reepicheep to the dragon. "Have you devoured a Narnian lord?" But the dragon shook his head violently. "Or perhaps," said Lucy, "this is the Lord Octessian, turned into a dragon, under enchantment, you know." "It needn't be either," said Edmund. "All dragons collect gold, but I think it's a safe guess that Octessian got no further than this island." "Are you the Lord Octessian?" said Lucy to the dragon. And then, when it sadly shook its head, "Are you someone enchanted? Someone human, I mean?" It nodded violently. And then someone said, people disputed afterwards whether Lucy or Edmund said it first, "You're not Eustace by any chance?" And Eustace nodded his terrible dragon head and thumped his tail in the sea, and everyone skipped back, of some of the sailors with ejaculations I will not put down in writing, to avoid the enormous and boiling tears which flowed from his eyes. Lucy tried hard to console him, and even screwed up her courage to kiss the scaly face, and nearly everyone said, "Hard luck!" And several assured Eustace that they would all stand by him, and many said there was sure to be some way of disenchanting him, and they'd have him as right as rain in a day or two, and of course they were all very anxious to hear his story, but he couldn't speak. More than once in the days that followed he attempted to write it for them on the sand, but this never succeeded. In the first place, Eustace, never having to read the right books, had no idea how to tell a story straight. And for another thing, the muscles and nerves of the dragon claws he had to use were never learned to write, and were not built for writing anyways. As a result, he never got nearly to the end before the tide came in and washed away all the writing except the bits he had already trodden on or accidentally swished out with his tail. And all that anyone had seen would be something like this. The dots are for the bits he'd smudged out. "I went to see Dragon's cave, 'cause it was dead, and ing so hard, woke up and couldn't get off my oh bother." It was, however, clear to everyone that Eustace's character had been rather improved by becoming a dragon. He was anxious to help. He flew over the whole island and found that it was all mountainous and inhabited only by wild goats and droves of wild swine. Of these he brought back many carcasses as provisions for the ship. He was a very humane killer, too, for he could dispatch a beast with one blow of his tail, so that it didn't know, and presumably still doesn't know, it had been killed. He ate a few himself, of course, but always alone, for now that he was a dragon, he liked his food raw, but he could never bear to let others see him at his messy meals. And one day, flying slowly and wearily, but in great triumph, he bore back to camp a great tall pine tree which he had torn up by the roots in a distant valley, and which could be made into a capital mast. And in the evening, if it turned chilly, as it sometimes did after heavy rains, he was a comfort to everyone, for the whole party would come and sit with their backs against his hot sides, and get well warmed and dried, and one puff of his fiery breath would light the most obstinate fire. Sometimes he would take a select party for a fly on his back, so that they could see wheeling below them the green slopes, the rocky heights, the narrow pit-like valleys, and far out over the sea to the eastward a spot darker blue on the blue horizon which might be land. The pleasure, quite new to him, of being liked, and, still more, of liking other people, was what kept Eustace from despair. For it was very dreary being a dragon. He shuddered whenever he caught sight of his own reflection as he flew over a mountain lake. He hated the huge bat-like wings, the saw-edge ridge on his back, and the cruel curved claws. He was as almost afraid to be alone with himself, and yet he was ashamed to be with the others. On the evenings when he was not being used as hot water bottle, he would slink away from the camp and lie curled up like a snake between the wood and the water. On such occasions, greatly to his surprise, Reepicheep was his most constant comforter. The noble mouse would creep away from the merry circle at the campfire and sit down by the dragon's head, well to the windward to be out of the way of his smoky breath. There he would explain that what had happened to Eustace was a striking illustration of the turn of fortune's wheel, and that if he had had Eustace at his own house in Narnia, it was really a hole, not a house, and the dragon's head, let alone his body, would not have fit in. He would show him more than 100 examples of emperors, kings, dukes, knights, poets, lovers, astrologers, philosophers, and magicians, who had fallen from prosperity into the most distressing circumstances, and of all whom many had recovered and lived happily ever afterwards. It did not, perhaps, seem so very comforting at the time, but it was kindly meant, and Eustace never forgot it. But of course what hung over everyone like a cloud was the problem of what to do with their dragon when they were ready to sail. They had tried not to talk of it when he was there, but he couldn't help overhearing things like, would he fit all along one side of the deck? And we'd have to shift all the stores to the other side down below so as to balance. Or, would towing him be any good? Would he be able to keep up by flying? And, most often of all, but how are we to feed him? And poor Eustace realized more and more that since the first day he had come on board, he had been an unmitigated nuisance, and he was now a greater nuisance still. And this ate into his mind, just as that bracelet ate into his foreleg. He knew that it only made it worse to tear at it with his great teeth, but he couldn't help tearing now and then, especially on hot nights. About 6 days after they had landed on Dragon Island, Edmund happened to wake up very early one morning. It was just getting gray so that you could see the tree trunks if they were between you and the bay, but not in the other direction. As he woke, he thought he heard something moving. So he raised himself on one elbow and looked about him, and presently he thought he saw a dark figure moving on the seaward side of the wood. The idea that at once occurred to his mind was, are we so sure there are no natives on this island after all? Then he thought it was Caspian. It was about the right size, but he knew that Caspian had been sleeping next to him, and he could see that he hadn't moved. Edmund made sure that his sword was in its place, and then rose to investigate. He came down softly to the edge of the wood, and the dark figure was still there. He saw now that it was too small for Caspian and too big for Lucy. It did not run away. Edmund drew his sword and was about to challenge the stranger, when the stranger said in a low voice, "Is that you, Edmund?" "Yes, who are you?" "Don't you know me?" said the other. "It's me, Eustace." "By Jove," said Edmund. "So it is, my dear chap." "Hush," said Eustace, and lurched as if he was going to fall. "Hello," said Edmund, steadying him. "What's up? Are you ill?" Eustace was silent for so long that Edmund thought he was fainting. But at last he said, "It's been ghastly, you don't know, but it's all right now. Could we go and talk somewhere? I don't want to meet the others just yet." "Yes, rather, anywhere you like," said Edmund. "We can go and sit on the rocks over there. I say, I'm glad to see you looking yourself again. You must have had a pretty beastly time." They went to the rocks and sat down looking out across the bay while the sky got paler and paler and the stars disappeared, except for one very bright one low down and near the horizon. "I won't tell you how I became a dragon till I tell the others and get it over with," said Eustace. "By the way, I didn't even know it was a dragon till I heard you all using the word when I turned up here the other morning. I wanted to tell you how I stopped being one." "Fire ahead," said Edmund.